Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar, Putting the Brakes on Rider Harassment, Research Tools, Community Partnerships, and Data-Driven Solutions. My name is Annie Lee, and I'm the Managing Director of Policy at Chinese for Affirmative Action and Stop AAPI Hate. I'm honored to moderate today's webinar. This webinar is sponsored by Stop AAPI Hate and the Mineta Transportation Institute. Stop AAPI Hate is a national coalition that tracks anti-AAPI hate acts and utilizes data, policy, and advocacy to end racism and discrimination against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Inspired by reports of harassment on transit, Stop AAPI Hate sponsored 2 transit safety bills in California, which have now become law. The Mineta Transportation Institute, or MTI, is a university transportation research center based at San Jose State University, whose mission is to increase mobility for all by improving the safety, efficiency, accessibility, and convenience of our nation's transportation systems. MTI accomplishes this through surface transportation research, technology transfer, education, and workforce development. We all know that far too many riders, particularly women and girls, LGBTQ riders, and religious and racial minorities, experience harassment on transit systems, such as racialized and sexualized slurs. Not only is this morally reprehensible, there's an economic cost. Harassment on transit systems drives people away from public transit. Luckily, things are changing. There are new laws in California addressing harassment on transit. Transit agencies and community-based organizations, or CBOs, know that harassment of riders is a problem and want to tackle it together. Today, we'll first hear from Senator Dave Min, who authored 2 transit safety laws. Then we'll hear from Asha Weinstein-Agrawal at MTI, who created a survey tool for transit agencies to measure harassment. Later, we'll hear from BART, Alliance for Girls, and LA Metro on how transit agencies can actually gather rider data and develop real solutions. It is my great pleasure to introduce Senator Dave Min of Orange County, who introduced SB 1161 and SB 434, 2 transit laws that are making a real difference for our community. Welcome, Senator Dave Min.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it. And it's an honor to be able to join this very important webinar. And so, as you mentioned, I did author SB 1161 and SB 434. And these are bills that I hope will, as they're implemented, begin the process of improving safety on public transit throughout California. As an Asian American who's not a particularly big guy, I know harassment is real. I've seen it happen. It happens in a lot of public spaces, and I think on public transit, we have a right to feel safe and secure in our bodies, no matter who we are, what we look like, etc. But we also know, as was mentioned earlier, that women and girls, particularly those who are of color, those who might identify as LGBTQ+, are too often the targets of sexual harassment and other unwanted harassment on public transit. That harassment includes unwanted sexual and racialized comments, things like slurs, whistling, leering, and of course, much worse. And, even if it's just that's unacceptable, but often it leads to much more. And we know that as a matter of experience, that this leads to a lot of people avoiding public transit. And I think it's no accident that the rise in reports of anecdotal reports of unwanted harassment has coincided with a steep drop in ridership in our public transit. And according to a 2019 study by University of California, San Diego Center on Gender Equity and Health, 77% of women experience sexual harassment in a public space, and 29% have experienced it on public transit. Now, I have heard since the start of the pandemic from a lot of AAPI members about the harassment that they've been facing, including people from my own family and some of my neighbors. And it's the harassment leads to not just that sense of a lack of safety at that point in time, but as we know, it leads to lingering fears over time and uncomfortableness in public spaces. And we have to root this out. Stop AAPI Hate received over 11,000 reports of anti-Asian hate acts from across the country. And of course, the vast majority of these came from women And many of these described verbal harassment occurring in public spaces like sidewalks, parks, and of course, public transit. So harassment on transit is something that affects our mental health, freedom of movement, and our sense of well-being. That's why I was proud to be able to author SB 1161 and SB 434. SB 1161 created a first of its kind survey tool to measure harassment on public transit. And I want to thank the Mineta Transportation Institute for creating this free tool, which is now available for any transit agency to use. SB 434 took that a step further and requires California's top 10 largest transit agencies to gather that data about riders and their experiences with harassment, and then publish this data by the end of this calendar year. Transit agencies will have to engage in outreach with communities under SB 434, and the goal here is to harness rider experiences to create the basis for data-driven solutions to address this problem of harassment on transit. So thank you for joining everyone here today, and thank you for your work in prioritizing transit safety for all our riders.
Thank you so much, Senator Min, for your leadership on SB 1161 and SB 434. I'm now happy to introduce Asha Weinstein-Agrawal, a professor of urban and regional planning at San Jose State and a researcher with MTI. Asha and her brilliant team, Asha is also MTI's education director, and she manages an online graduate program in transportation management. Asha, along with her brilliant team, implemented SB 1161 and created a survey tool for transit agencies to measure harassment. Welcome, Asha.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that introduction. I am really pleased to be here to be able to share just a lightning overview of the survey instrument we've developed in hopes that you'll be curious and go learn more in depth from some of our written products. So we have developed what's called a transit passenger survey. So this is usually when you approach passengers while they're using transit and offer them either paper and clipboard and pencil to fill out right then and there, or maybe a QR code so that people can just jump on their phone and fill out the survey. And don't try and read this, but I'm just going to give you here an overview. So what we created, it's 2 pages, both sides of a single 8.5 by 11 sheet that would get handed out to passengers. And if you notice the little yellow, what we've done is that's places where a particular transit agency could put its own name in to customize the service, the survey. And if you wanted, that would be the only change you would need to make. We developed this survey through a very long process of, in particular, pilot testing it with very, very different people, with experts, some of them on this call, with just regular riders. And then we actually pilot tested this survey with 329 riders on both AC Transit and BART to get a really diverse group of people completing it so we could see, are people skipping questions or answering in ways that would suggest they hadn't understood it. So after a whole lot of fine tuning, we came up with our survey questionnaire, which tries to balance 5 priorities. 1, maximizing the chance that passengers will actually submit it, accept it, and turn it back in. And this is actually a surprisingly hard challenge with surveys in general. So we took approaches like we kept it very short. That's why it's just that sort of 2 sides of a single sheet of paper. We have questions that you almost always just answer by checking a box because people find it sort of cognitively more tiring if they need to write out answers. So we've mostly avoided that. And we've also wanted, second priority was to make a survey that's easy, quick, as cheap as it can be for transit agencies to administer. And again, actually, some of the same things that make it easy for passengers help the transit operators, because if people are just checking boxes, it's much easier to kind of collect and analyze the data swiftly. A third challenge is designing questions that a wide range of people will understand. And that goes back to all the survey testing and piloting we did with, again, very people of different ages, sort of ethnicities, cultural backgrounds, and so forth. For SB 1161 sent out a lot of very important topics, so we wanted to make sure we covered all of them. And then finally, and this is where I'm going to talk just a little bit in detail, we worked very hard to get a questionnaire that would really document the different types of harassing behaviors that unfortunately are out there. So as researchers, we sort of have classified these into verbal, that could be comments or sounds that are threatening, nonverbal harassment, which could be gestures, stalking somebody, showing pornography, and then finally physical harassment, whether that's groping someone, spitting on their backpack, pushing them, all those sorts of harassment and assault. And what I want to stress is from earlier research, we learned that if you simply ask people, have you been harassed? The great majority will say no. And then if you give that same group of people a list of behaviors similar to what you're seeing right here on this slide, many, like, I don't know, 30, 40% of the people who said, no, I have not been harassed, will say that they have experienced one or more of these behaviors. So that is really key to the way we designed our survey. And I'm showing you here just one question, which is in some ways the heart. And we ask people, have you experienced, and we don't say, have you been harassed? We simply give that list of different behaviors that people can, let us know if it has or hasn't happened to them. Also, we ask people if they have seen it happen to others. Some people may not get harassed, but they may be seeing it, which gives us useful information. And also, this is a very sensitive subject. And for some people, saying that one of these things has happened to you might just be too painful and uncomfortable, but you might be willing to check that box that you saw it happen to others. So let me just wrap up here with a few of our key implementation recommendations. One, we definitely recommend that you administer the survey to passengers while they're riding the system rather than, say, using an email list, because that onboard surveying will get you a much more diverse and wider range of respondents. It's also important to have people complete the survey themselves so they have a sense of privacy. It's an anonymous survey, but sometimes transit agencies will have you tell your answers to a surveyor who writes it down, and that obviously could be very uncomfortable. Also, it could be very valuable to implement the same survey every 1 to 2 years, because if you use the same survey, you can then, as an agency, start to identify trends. Hopefully, we see harassment decreasing, but this is a tool that lets you gauge that. And then finally, and I think this is something the rest of the panel is going to talk about in more detail, surveys are very good for some things and not good at all for other things. And so it's important to pair survey research with other kinds of data collection, and particularly qualitative methods. The survey can give you that baseline of data, that ability to track change over time on the system, but it's never going to give you kind of rich descriptions of the kinds of behaviors that victims are suffering. And there are also certain groups of people who just don't respond much to surveys. And so it can be useful to have other methods to reach out to them. So finally, just sharing some resources. I think you may have seen the link in the study, in the chat, but we also have our survey translated, thank you, Stop AAPI Hate, into a total of 14 languages. And here, again, the slides will be available, just if you want to read a bit about this. And then finally, just to acknowledge that this was a work of many people. I had an amazing team of researchers and an incredible advisory board, which includes several of the people on this webinar. So with that, thank you very much. And later on, if anyone wants to reach out, I'd be very happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Asha. We know that data is a necessary first step to tackling harassment on transit systems, and it's wonderful that this survey instrument is available online for free and translated into multiple languages, including Spanish, Chinese, and 12 other AAPI languages. We encourage transit agencies in California and beyond to use and adapt this survey to better understand your riders. Right, now that there's a survey tool that transit agencies can use, let's talk about actual data gathering to develop meaningful solutions to harassment on transit. I am so excited for the audience to hear from our amazing panel today, and I will let them introduce themselves now. So Chantal, then Meghna, then Alicia, can you please tell us who you are, your current role, and your experience working to tackle harassment on transit?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Chantal Hildebrand. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the co-executive director of Alliance for Girls, an alliance of over 120 plus girl and gender expansive youth serving organizations across the San Francisco Bay Area and LA County, all working towards creating a society where the experiences and knowledge of girls and gender expansive youth of color and the organizations that serve them are centered and valued. We do this work basically by building interconnected and generative spaces where girls and gender expansive youth of color and their champions and the institutions that serve them share knowledge, power, and accountability through girl-centered research and data-driven systems change advocacy. So the reason I'm here with y'all today, and thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this panel, I'm super excited to be here, is basically through the work that Alliance for Girls has been doing with BART over the past few years. In our 2019 Together We Rise report created by girls and gender expansive youth themselves, 100% of the 63 girls and gender expansive youth who participated in the study shared that they experienced sexual harassment while taking public transport every day. We were able to turn this research into action with BART, the Betty Ono Foundation, the Unity Council's Latinx Mentorship and Achievement Program, Black Girls Brilliance, and over 10 of our member organizations by creating the Not One More Girl Initiative, a first of its kind community-driven initiative centering girls and gender expansive youth to reimagine safety for BART riders. Phase 1 of this initiative resulted in the passage of a 12-point resolution of community-informed policy recommendations that BART continues to work to implement, along with awareness building campaigns to shift the narrative and culture of gender-based violence and sexual harassment. The work of the Not One More Girl campaign helped inform SB 434 as well as SB 1161. So we're really excited about that work. And we continue to work with BART as well as also our other member organizations to really think about what does it actually truly mean to shift the way we understand and map and measure safety so that we're centering those most vulnerable in those conversations to ensure that they are actually able to participate in these communities that we want them to be part of and want to grow into. So that's a little bit about me and why I'm here, and I'm super excited to be here. And I'll pass it over. I think it was Meghna or Alicia? Meghna.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I am Meghna Khanna. I am the Deputy Executive Officer with our planning group at LA Metro. But just to tell you why I'm here, the reason being LA Metro back in 2017, under the leadership of our now CEO, Stephanie Wiggins, started Women and Girl Governing Council. So it's a group of Metro employees, union, non-union. And what it does is it applies a gender perspective to policies, programs at LA Metro. What are we doing in terms of improving our system for girls and women, using the system and making it safer, better? I was part of that group, and there are other groups too, but I'll just talk about I was part of that group leading the effort to see how can we make the system more safer, more reliable for our women and girls. And that's where we quickly realized LA Metro was not even collecting data that was disaggregated by gender. Or if we were collecting the data, we were not asking the right questions to understand that unique differences between the two genders. So that's where understanding how women travel study was born. I was very fortunate to lead that study under the leadership of our CEO. And that study gave us a unique perspective of how women are using our system. We were able to engage with CBOs. We were able to conduct focus groups. Again, to Asha's point, not just doing those survey tools, which gives us good quantitative data, but it's all about that qualitative data, trying to reach those hard to reach community groups. And that study gave us so much insights, and I'll talk about it as we get into the discussion. And out of that studies, once we had all these findings, LA Metro created a gender action plan, which specifically addressed how we can make our system safer, more designed to address the needs of women and girls, and in addition, reduce that stress and burden they feel while using a system when it comes to fair policies or even when it comes to harassment. So that's where my role at LA Metro evolved, to addressing that gender perspective on all our programs policies. We have created a gender analysis tool. And in addition, the Transit Ambassador program was a direct result of understanding how women travel and the Gender Action Plan. So I'm very excited. I'll stop there and I'll turn it over to Alicia so she can give us her insights.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Trost. I am BART's Chief Communications Officer. And I, along with BART's Art Program Manager, Jennifer Easton, we championed taking on sexual harassment after years of being too scared to take on the topic. And one time doing one social media post that did not land well. And what made this effort different is that we brought on cultural strategists and community partners like the Alliance for Girls and Betty Ono and Unity Council. So I'm really excited to share that knowledge with you so that you all don't step in it like we did originally.
Thank you three so much for serving on our panel. So ASHA and MTI created a really useful survey to help transit agencies gather data about harassment. But how do you actually implement data gathering, especially if a transit agency has never done this before? So let's start with Chantal and then Alicia. Where do you start? Where do you start?
Sure. So, historically, research has been extremely extractive and has even sometimes been harmful to the communities that researchers are really trying to serve and claim to serve, especially when it comes to vulnerable communities of color. So it is actually really essential that transit agencies begin this work by connecting with the communities that make up their ridership. It's also really important to remember that the MTI survey is a useful tool to begin the conversation around harassment at different transit agencies with your ridership, but it is a tool. And in order for it to actually be useful and effective, you actually need the community to know what you're using it for, and you need to start building trust with them around what you're trying to do, and get their, not just their input, but really get their creativity and their expertise of how to do this really well. As Asha shared, being able to give the survey out on the train is useful information and will get you good data. However, it's really important that you actually connect with community-based organizations and groups that are representative of your ridership and share with them what you're trying to accomplish and invite them as co-creators, not just informants, into that space. It's really important to also invest in their expertise by paying them for their time and their energy. Have them join as community partners in this work and give these groups and the people that they serve the opportunity to imagine and reimagine what safety means to them and what tangible steps you as a transit agency can take together with this community to create an environment where harassment is not tolerated and unacceptable. It's also really important to note who's not in the room, right? And who are we considering our riders? And really figure out which vulnerable groups we're missing in this conversation, and asking ourselves why those certain groups are missing and why they're not in this space, so that you can actually start to create steps to make space for them at that table. However, really, before anything starts, research starts with trust. It has to start with trust. So it's essential to go into the community and actually talk to people and to the organizations that have been serving these groups, who represent these groups, who have been in these spaces every day, to ask them what is it they're looking for, what do they need, and how can you actually work with them to make this environment safer for them and the people that they serve. So that would be my first recommendation as a place to start.
and I would jump in on that because Bart was exactly in that position in the terms of we wanted to build trust within the community before we took on a topic that is so prevalent and that has people have past trauma with it. And, you know, I wasn't an expert going into it. I just knew I wanted to take on the topic of gender-based violence and sexual harassment. I also knew that there'd be people that wouldn't want to call the police in those situations because of the deep community learning that we had already been doing in that space in terms of progressive policing and outreach. And so the very first step was developing relationships with community-based organizations who have access to the community and that can guide us, literally guide us and hold our hand. This is the language you use. This is how you go to them and create a space where you can have these conversations. So once we did that, the next thing we did was we basically worked together on a framework of what we wanted to do. And then what was really smart is then I took it to our board of directors. And what we did is we brought along all of these community-based organizations and young girls and gender expansive youth from the community. And we showed them how to go speak for themselves in front of an elected body and to basically demand that Bart put energy into this. So that resolution, which is on our website of bart.gov/not one more girl, it basically said, you know, Bart supports this effort. Please put staff behind this effort. And so what that does is it gave me some clout within the agency to work beyond just my normal chief communication officer job description to break those barriers because I was told no. And everyone that works at an agency that takes this on, you're going to be told no from all sorts of people. Or why now? I got a lot of why nows. I got a lot of no's. We've never done that. I got a lot of, but our survey doesn't have space for that question, but harassment isn't against the penal code. And guess what? We worked through every single one of those issues. And it's because we took it to our board and I had the backing of our board. So that's a great place to start.
That was really helpful, Chantal and Alicia. Chantal, also, I'm at a CBO and I also hear how extractive data can be, and honestly, survey fatigue. Community members feel survey fatigue and they want to understand, why do I have to fill out another form? What is this for? And Alicia, I think that's such a smart strategy to have started with the board to give you the cover that you needed to move this forward. And it really starts with those values that then trickle down throughout the entire transit agency. Meghna, I want to shift to you because you worked on LA Metro's landmark report, How Women Travel, and you've experienced working with CBOs to improve data gathering beyond surveys. So I would love if you could talk about how you collaborated with CBOs on outreach efforts and qualitative data gathering, because we're also hearing that surveys are just one tool, and actually SB 434 does require actual outreach and qualitative data measuring. There's also a question that I think you can answer in there too about how do you even engage with CBOs? Like, what is the initial outreach like, especially for some of our transit agencies that don't have existing relationships with community-based organizations?
Right. Yeah, no, I would start by saying, even like understanding how women travel, it was such a unique study. So we knew quantitative data would not be enough. So we really approached it by looking at ways of this innovative strategies to engage the community. And we started with focus groups, and these focus groups were allowed us to have these open conversations around sensitive topic. And what we did was, even to recruit people for these focus groups, we actually reached out to the CBOs to help us get that representative group that will participate in the focus groups. And one thing I really want to focus on is we separated these focus groups. We had one focus group with men and two focus groups with women. We kept them separate because, again, we were getting into these sensitive topics of safety and sexual harassment, and we wanted to have this open conversation. And generally, we have seen sometimes women don't feel comfortable when men are in the room to talk about what harassment they've faced. So that was our way of just separating these two groups and hearing more from them. And another thing I would say is LA Metro removed ourselves from these focus groups. We were in another room listening to the conversation, but we were not there. We had our facilitator hired to just engage in these focus groups. They could ask those questions. All these focus groups were asked the same questions, but then we were able to get their different perspective. And in addition to that, I do want to mention that we used another way of engaging with the CBOs. We reached out and did strategic partnership with CBOs in Los Angeles, a CBO that focused on people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, and then people who have varying immigration or documentation status. Because these are the people who are our most loyal customers, but they are generally left out when it comes to these survey tools, and they are not ready to participate with using the QR codes. So our goal was to engage them by doing these workshops with them. So we could have a community embedded form of engagement with them. What we did was we went to them, we asked them to create collages in response to the prompt, what is your experience taking public transit? And the best part about these workshops were that we got a lot of women alongside children who participated in that. They were able to create collages showing how their experience was in transit system, what worked, what didn't work. And also one thing we did was we made sure that these workshops were child friendly. We had activities for the children, so there could be full participation at all times from these women. And, again, they didn't have to figure out a way to where to drop their child before coming to us. And based on these workshops, we were able to collect data from these women who actually were using 65 of our Metro's 165 bus routes. So that was really great. Again, getting that. And then just shifting gear, we also did what we call participant observation survey. I do want to add, this is where our team just went and did 2,000 hours of observation on our trains and buses. We created a form with our UCLA partners, and we were just getting on the buses and trains to see when women get on the train, are they carrying bags? Where do they sit? Do they sit in an aisle? On the buses, are they sitting in the front? Are they going to the back? So all this observation was really critical. And then last but not the least, we did some pop-up engagements, again, engaging with the CBOs, where they came out with us. We just asked people, catching them on the ride as they were getting on and off their buses or train system, to ask, what made your ride easy? What made your ride difficult? So those two simple questions, because people can remember what they just experienced rather than having them to recall and scratch their brain. And then to answer your question, how do you engage the CBOs? So LA Metro, we have now actually established a community-based organization partnering program, where for all our projects, we have a CBO database, which we can use for any project program that is being implemented at Metro. This CBO database allows us to tap into those resources that we can see in the database. In addition, we reach out to them, and they also offer us helps and say, no, maybe for this project purpose, you should reach out to these. And we do pay them. So going back to Alicia's point, we do pay, and Chantal's point, we do pay these CBOs for their engagement. So we do have a budget that's set aside for that CBO engagement. And that has really helped us get into the community, get their observation, not having them being burdened by us engaging them, but rather than feeling that they are being compensated for all that unique perspective they're providing.
Meghna, that is really, really helpful. I think there's so much nuts and bolts that go into qualitative data gathering. Even a focus group, you think it's really simple, you get people together, but actually we should be thinking about things like translation services and interpretation, live interpretation, childcare, food. If you're doing this after work, it's dinner time and you have to feed people, incentives. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's really helpful for transit agencies to work with CBOs, because CBOs do that all the time. We have lots of experience gathering community members and providing live interpretation, childcare, all of that. And so partnering there is really, really helpful. Now that you three have all talked about how to gather high quality data, let's shift to data-driven solutions. So how can transit agencies and CBOs work together to interpret the data that's gathered and then develop solutions? And I want to thank our audience members, many of whom have submitted questions already about the role of law enforcement, crisis intervention specialists, and bystander intervention. I know BART and Alliance for Girls have thought about these options. So let's start with Alicia, then Chantal. What are some data-driven solutions to harassment that you've seen work?
So we've learned so much just from collecting data and asking it multiple ways, even just so we started with our original one question. If you experienced it, we did a more in-depth set of questions. And then when we do community engagement against events, we had surveys. Now we all have a universal survey, which was tested on BART. So I've seen those results. But my point is that I've learned so much about the types of harassment taking place, as well as things that people don't know about our system. When you work for a transit agency, remember, you are literally an expert at your system, and most of the folks writing just don't know. So one of the biggest aha moments for me is hearing over and over and over again that there should be a call button on our cars. And guess what? We have a call button on all of our cars. So that tells me I need better communication about where those call buttons are, who they go to, how you can use them. And that is where we've worked with artists, cultural strategists, and youth from our communities who we've designed posters. And we've even surveyed our writers about the posters, and they have told us, we have the data that says just reading those posters and understanding the tips that were coming from the posters that were beautifully designed. These are not text heavy. It's literally art from local artists, have told us that they feel safer on BART. They now know what to do. We've offered tips that don't involve calling police. We've offered tips that do involve calling police, because you have to offer both. Another huge survey done by the Bay Area Council taught us that lesson, that while there's many people who ask for more police on BART, there is a huge double-digit percentage increase of people who say they don't want that option. They want something else. So you have to have that dual approach. It's not an all or nothing on either side also, because we get pulled a lot of different ways. Anyone that works for a transit agency knows this. So you just have to have both. And so we heard early on from youth, especially youth in the Bay Area, youth of color, transgender youth, they are frightened by police officers. And so we did start our Ambassador and Crisis Intervention Specialist program. We even were asked by the Alliance for Girls to hire youth from the community to serve on those hiring panels, and we did that. There's little things like that your agency can do, and you sort of don't know to do it unless you have this advice from community organizations. So we've learned a lot about what should go on the posters and then next steps, just because we're asking the questions in surveys, not just on our trains, but we survey when we go out into the community and have these engagement events.
Yeah, and I'll add on there. I mean, as Alicia said, like a lot of the recommendations that BART has been implementing came from community conversation, came from people sharing ideas, and making sure that people understand and know that when they're giving their input, it's actually being taken and changes are being made. Because that's the worst feeling in the world, as we all know, is when we give input to somebody, or when we're asked to do something like this, and then we're just giving our data away and nothing happens. That is the worst experience. It also breaks trust. So having such a powerful opportunity to be able to share with Alicia and her team and BART around, like, you know, this is what we want to see, this is what we need, and then having campaigns centered around that, having it actually show up in the communication that BART does, having it show up in artwork, having it show up in actually hiring practices, in seeing that now they're community ambassadors in spaces and crisis intervention specialists, that it's not just police options, because the reality is also communities of color, specifically Black communities, have not been saved or supported often by police force. And we have enough data to show that, especially also women who've experienced sexual harassment. I think this was a question somebody raised earlier in the Q&A, and I'll answer it now, is why people actually say that they are less likely to say that they're harassed, even though they've experienced behaviors that are harassing. Language matters. Harassment sounds really scary. And when you have experienced something like that, sometimes your brain goes into a mode of minimizing it. And it's much easier to then be like, no, that was a one-off, it's just a bad experience. And you know, it helps to break down the behaviors. And similarly in these solutions, is really making sure that we're not just using jargon language, that we're effectively also using language that makes sense to our communities, and the language that shows up so much in the Not One More Girl campaign artwork, making sure that it's designed by young people, that young people can relate to it, and where they understand also, like, they're seen in it, they can see themselves in these spaces. The other, like, really simple things to do, even though I know they cost money and they take time, is really those renovation and changes to stations and bus and like cars, transit cars, that include a gender equity focus and lens. This is like having female only cars. This happens in other countries, the safety in that. Better lighting at transit stations. The amount of times that we sit in transit agencies and I'm standing at a platform and a light is out and it's dark as heck. Yeah, that adds a new level of fear. Phone and tablet charging stations at the platforms and also on the trains, like on trains and buses. It is really valuable because all of us are on our phones 24/7. Those things die. And it's really valuable to just remember that the reality is, when people are using these spaces, we use these spaces differently, and we may be using them to go into different areas of our life. However, it requires us to really think about someone's experience, exactly as Meghna said. Understanding how women travel, understanding how gender expansive folks travel, and what they have to think about 24/7 when they're moving in space, because these spaces were not created for them. It requires us to think differently, to think outside of our own realm of comfort. Also, just really having both non-police responses, police responses is really valuable. I know for myself, what's really great of what BART was able to do, and what we were able to do with BART, is being able to have information of crisis centers, or people to call, of agencies to call in their own community, not just hotlines, but actual people in their community who can show up, support, be there, especially when you're transitioning transit. So not just on the train, but then on the platform, but when you get out of the platform and you're waiting for the bus, or you're waiting for your Uber or your Lyft. Those are things you have to think about. Or when you're trying to get your bike, or you're walking to your car. Like, those are all things you have to think about, and it does require a gendered lens. It just does, because we're different, because this world was created differently for each of us. And that's just the reality of it. So I think that those are really the most helpful. I also think taking this seriously by actually having sexual harassment called out in your rider code of conduct. It sends a message to everyone that this is actually a serious issue. That's a good first step, and you can build around that really well. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Chantal. And Meghna, I was going to ask you to elaborate on some of the things you've seen at LA Metro. You referenced earlier your transit ambassadors, which I understand LA Metro is actually expanding and now bringing in-house. There's a question, too, that I think can be lumped in. Does it work? Like, people are asking what actually decreases harassment, and what are you seeing as effective?
So again, I'll start with the Transit Ambassador Program, just to, again, give that lens of why we went down that route. It was basically when we did Understanding How Women Travel, all the focus group, workshops, pop-up events, it was very clear that riders have a more complex view of security staffing. Some felt that police were so slow to react or ineffective at all, while others felt, yes, police were too aggressive, but they were needed, right? So that's where LA Metro had to reimagine our public safety. We had to bring this multi-layered approach to safety, and we started investing in care-based program and reducing that reliance on armed police responses. So we started again, we issued a contract. We recruited ambassadors from 3 community-based organizations. So this contract, the way it worked, it was with 3 community-based organizations. We brought 300 ambassadors on board, and we gave them training in cultural and situational awareness, unconscious bias, disability awareness, customer service, trauma-informed response. So all that to answer your question, has it been successful? Just to give you an answer, just in the last year, we have seen our ambassadors reverse opioid overdose and have helped save 72 lives. Saving one life is big deal. 72 lives being saved by these transit ambassadors is huge. In addition, our recent surveys have shown that 60% of our riders said that the presence of ambassadors have made their experience on public transportation safer because they see these green shirts and they feel they can ask those questions. There's someone they can reach out to if they are in a situation. So it's been very, very successful for us. And just based on that success, as Annie, you said, Metro Board has made that unanimously voted to make the ambassadors program, that pilot program, permanent. And we are bringing that program in-house. We currently will, of course, honor that 2-year ambassador contract that we have. And eventually these individuals or ambassadors will become part of the Metro employee. So we are seeing real good success coming out of this program. These ambassadors are eyes for us, extension of actually Metro staff. That's how I see it. And they provide a good balance of not over-policing our system because it goes through various neighborhoods and people are, of course, they respond differently when they see too much policing. So I feel like it's been a great success. And Elemental feels like that.
Thank you, Meghna, for sharing those stats. We have a bunch of great audience questions coming in, so I'm going to have our panelists tackle 3 if we can in the next 11 minutes. But first, Asha, there was a question about whether in survey design there was outreach done with older adults and people with disabilities or people with special needs. And then other panelists, if you have experience with outreach to those particular communities, please chime in as well.
Thank you. Yes, we did reach out to a diverse group of people. I can say with great confidence they included a number of older adults, partly because the Affirmative Alliance, sorry, Annie, I'm suddenly forgetting your organization's name, really kindly organized a focus group for us with older Chinese-speaking immigrant members of our community. And so we got to hear from people who were, the different generation, didn't speak English, and were using a translated version of our survey. And we found a number of things, for example, that questions that might have made perfect sense to someone who grew up in the Bay Area in terms of language really were very confusing to these participants. And now, in terms of people with disabilities, that is an excellent question. I can't say for certain that we tested it with people with disabilities. So that's a good observation. Next time.
I have seen a number of chat questions and comments come through that really, I think, highlight this question, which is how do you bridge the gap between actual safety statistics on transit and the perception of safety to increase ridership? I'm saying that because I'm seeing questions come in about homelessness, about mental health issues, and about all of the other things that happen in our transit agencies that change how people perceive safety versus actual data, like quantitative data, on safety. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I would love to chime in. So one of the things from phase 2 of the Not One More Girl campaign, we heard from youth about the crowding levels at BART. And what we did is I was able to use those voices from the youth to advocate to run trains shorter. And that we made it as part of this initiative. So the trains are not as long. So there's more people in each car. And we have seen it, the data is there, that people are feeling safer about BART. They feel safer riding BART because there's no more empty cars, which youth told us they felt very frightened for. So we are actually starting to see that the tide turning in the overall perception data, that people are feeling safer. They're also saying things like it's cleaner, which is wonderful. And it is because of these efforts, right? I mean, we can run shorter trains because it costs BART less, but part of getting it to making that final decision was because we heard from women and youth and gender expansive people that having more people in a car to support them. And then I wanted to give a shout out to our bystander intervention cards, which I literally carry with me. I think you just saw me get it out of my bag. I carry lots of extra of these. And this came from Anika Howard, who's in the chat. She really got this idea from the young youth that we were working with. So we're testing these right now. And it's, if you see someone being harassed, you hand them the card and it says, do you want me to stand with you? Do you want me to call police? Do you want, let's get out of this car together? Or if you're being harassed, you can quietly pass it. And there is a survey on it. So we're trying to measure the impact. We're getting this out in the community. All the station agent booths have it. So, we'll report back on what we learned from this. But another thing is folks have told us just having this makes them feel safer because it kind of gives them the prompts so they're more aware. I'm just shocked at the amount of people who tell us they freeze up and they just don't know what to do. So we have to be repetitive. We have to constantly tell these messages of it's okay to get up and leave. It's okay to move. It's okay to start a conversation with someone. Pretend you know them. So these are the types of prompts we need to keep telling folks, and we'll report back on these cards. I promise.
And I just want to take another look at perception of safety. It again goes back to lighting levels at our stations and the access points. So LA Metro is making an effort to increase our lighting levels at the platforms, and especially the subway platforms, in multiple levels to it. So ensuring that lighting levels are consistent across locations of elevators. I think sometimes those elevators becomes an issue. Women, again, traveling with carts and strollers have to use these elevators, but where they are located becomes that whole idea of, oh, it doesn't look safe or it doesn't feel safe. So I think it's just taking a look at how we are designing our stations, where are things, also focusing on station design. Sometimes these subway platforms are so long, so creating these concentrated amenity zones where you have the blue call button, you have more seating, you have more ambassadors present. So it's just like these little design changes that can also help. And of course, it goes back to how clean our stations are. So providing more trash receptacles, having more cleaning crew out there, which we are changing. We are bringing more cleaning crew on our system to clean the stations on a regular basis. So all these things help. And also, last but not the least, I will say just balancing between the presence of police and transit ambassador. Don't over police your system because you feel like you have to make sure people who have fare are going in. So I think those are some design things that all transit agencies should consider to make their system feel safe.
And I just want to add in here, I think the other thing is, as you're making changes or as you're thinking about these ideas, keep in mind, like, what works for one transit agency may not work for another. You have to ask people. We have to talk to people. Ask what are ways that we can make this, like, how do people even perceive safety? That's a lot of what is really important about this work. Alliance for Girls did a research study on radical visions of safety, and ask young people how girls and gender expansive youth themselves define safety. What does it mean for them? Because it is different than how we think about safety as adults. And it's also different by the multiple intersectional identities we all have. So I think it's really important as you're making shifts and trying things, knowing that it may not work for absolutely every person, and that who's missing, who do we need to think about, how, and understanding like what does safety mean to humans? And I think that is a really important piece of all of this, is always going back and asking, knowing that we won't be able to do everything, but there are ways that we can make these small changes, these subtle shifts that allow people to feel like not only are they feeling heard, but they feel belonging in that space. Sometimes these like the spaces feel really sterile. Sometimes people want to see art. Some people really feel like good about seeing youth art in spaces. And I think like that's something that phase 2 and of the Not One More Girl campaign that is being led by the Betty Ono Foundation and BART and the Unity Council has been really putting forward. And I think it's essential that we understand that transit agencies themselves cannot just be experts in this space. The people who are riders and people who want to use transit, who transit is made for, are the experts in these spaces. And that requires us to think about it a little bit differently, and always come back to it, knowing that you may make a small change and other people may be like, you know what, we thought that would work, and that actually is not feeling good. And then that's okay. We have to be adaptable. Like, this is the whole point of creating environments where people feel like they are allowed to be part of. So don't get discouraged if it's not perfect, because perfection is what people are looking for. We're looking for a space where we feel like we can exist on, and where people have our backs. So that's what we're all aiming for. It's trial and error, and just know that, we have some really good examples of what is already happening, and making sure that it's really the voices of those that are often not heard, or often not listened to. Our young folk, our people who experience homelessness, our folks who are disabled, young moms. I think it's really important to just acknowledge, like, what voices are forgotten in space, and let's make room for those voices to actually be centered.
I love that, Chantal. And I think you're so right about how it's not perfection. It's trying our best to interpret this data, finding solutions, pivoting when necessary. And that's why the trust is so, so important, because you cannot make those pivots without trust with CBOs and the people that you serve. And to Alicia's point earlier, you can't make the pivot without, like, your board backing and, like, the agency being all in on this. So we're almost at the top of the hour. So I just want to thank Senator Min, MTI, and our incredible panelists for sharing their insights with everyone today. There are so many resources available to transit agencies and CBOs to tackle harassment on transit. First, check out MTI's website, where you can find the free survey tool, including translations in Spanish, Chinese, and other API languages. Second, you can also check out Stop AAPI Hate's No Place for Hate website, where you can find more about SB 1161, SB 434, and model legislation if you want to get your state or locality to pass similar laws. Lastly, All of Us are a resource for you. And I'm also going to throw in Annika Howard, Betty Ono, who's in the audience. She's also an expert on this. Please reach out to any of us if you have questions after this webinar. I understand that Alvarina MTI has graciously recorded this webinar, so hopefully they'll be sending that out along with our contact info. Please come to us if you have any other questions, and thank you so much for joining us today.